this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Welcome back. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories. Donald Trump says a mineral deal with Ukraine could be signed next week as Ukrainian, US and European officials met to broker a ceasefire deal. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has announced that he may visit the UK in September. And British Transport Police say transgender officers will no longer be able to conduct searches on people of the opposite sex, following yesterday's Supreme Court ruling that the legal definition of a woman is based on biological sex. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the PR consultant Alex Deane and the Belfast Telegraph columnist Allison. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. It's time. The Mirror speaks to the widow of Anthony Shackleton about his last moments before his death at the Dignitas Assisted Dying Clinic in Switzerland. This is the front of the Eye, where it says that the UK government is coming under increasing pressure to cut food standards in order to secure a trade deal with the USA. The Guardian says Labour ministers are scrambling to stop a rebellion on the backbenches by MPs opposed to controversial cuts in disability benefits. The Telegraph leads with news from Lloyds Bank that it will continue to support its trans workers in case yesterday's Supreme Court ruling on what legally defines a woman has any effect on them. The Mail, meanwhile, says Labour has been thrown into turmoil by the ruling, with one minister failing to back single-sex spaces and one union saying it will ignore the ruling. The Sun reports that a no-fly zone for drones over the King's Sandringham home has been imposed after security fears were raised when Ukraine's President Zelensky visited last month. And we're joined tonight by Alex Deane and Allison. Welcome to both
Thank you very
of
much.
you. Let us start with the Mail. Labour turmoil on trans ruling. The article going on to detail that the Health Minister refused 4 times to say which changing room transgender women should use. Alex,
and moreover, there are left-wing members of the Labour Party and the party's own internal LGBT plus groups which have criticised the Supreme Court's decision as well. And it follows that they, at least, would like the government to disagree with what the Supreme Court had concluded about the binary nature of sex. Of course, if people on the right criticise judges about things like immigration decisions or short sentences or Brexit, that's an outrageous attack on judicial independence. When people on the left criticise the judiciary over things like this, they're standing up for the right thing and they are doing decent work. They're going to have to decide whether or not they will accept the court's judgment. And I imagine Keir Starmer's instinct as a former Director of Public Prosecution is absolutely strongly to say, we respect the judiciary, we think they've got it right in this unanimous decision and we'll now follow it. He'll have some difficulty with past remarks of his own, where he wouldn't say, you know, if a woman could have a penis and so forth, which he's come round now to say, Rosie Duffield was right, a woman can't have a penis. But that's the position I think that he would find popular in the country as well. But he's really going to struggle with his own left.
Alison.
I'm not sure that a lot of the comment on this is based on the reality of the actual ruling, so I'm not going to pretend I've read all the 88 pages of it. But looking through the summary of it, I think that what people seen yesterday was you seen people celebrating and you see J.K. Rowling, you know, sipping wine and smoking cigars, and then you see people from the trans community in distress saying this means all our rights have been stripped, and neither of those things is actually true. The ruling was asked to rule on one very specific point, and that's what it has done. It doesn't remove any protections from people from the Equality Act, and trans people still do have those protections, and a lot of it's very ambiguous and it's open to interpretation. I do think that what we'll see going forward is maybe further judicial rulings or judicial reviews, but do remember Parliament's sovereign and they can't just introduce laws to overrule whatever it is that the Supreme Court have put in place. What I would like to see is maybe some more actually drilling down into the terms of what this actually does mean going forward. And I would like to think that normal trans men and women who are just ordinarily getting on with their lives have, I think, been thrown into the middle of a culture war. And what we do know is hard cases make bad law. And what we've seen highlighted, especially in papers like the Daily Mail, is those hard cases, those predatory men who get to court for sex offences and then all of a sudden say, well, I identify as a woman. And that's then obviously caused public outrage, and rightly so, because predatory men shouldn't be allowed to abuse the law in that way. And then we've also seen, and I think that this has been detrimental to the trans rights debate, is people on the other side of it who have said, well, you know, trans women are women biologically, we're biologically a woman. Well, you're not, you know, and we know that, and most trans women know that as well. So I do think that maybe this ruling, as hard it is for some people to deal with this week on either side of that debate, might open up to a more sensible debate, because I'm sitting here speaking to you about this, and this is a conversation that I have avoided for several years, because whenever you get involved in it, you find that people then misinterpret your words, they misinterpret them as something else. I mean, I tried to have a conversation on X, formerly Twitter, about prisons, because I'm a security and crime journalist and I work in prisons, so I know what goes on in women's prisons, and tried to explain to them, you know, I think some people think women's prisons are like prisoner cell block H, you know, where everyone living in dorms and showering in showers. And I'm like, look, this isn't how prisons work. And all of a sudden then you're attacked and said, oh, you're trying to put women at risk in prisons. The women in prisons already at risk. The majority of them come through the care system. They're abused women and have been abused all their lives. And we should take to the streets and protest for that. But the fact is, I think that this ruling, when you read down in it, some of it is quite sensible, and it's just quite sensibly nice saying, look, this is where this debate has went off in all sorts of different directions. People have took it in all sorts of different directions, and can we now get back to the law and what the law actually says? So it has defined the law, and it also, and I would hope people remember that the Equality Act is still in place. Rights have not been stripped from people, and they still have rights. If you were denied a job, for instance, because you were trans, you still have rights under the Equality Act to challenge that.
That Equality Act point is fair. I suppose in the absence of a judgment like this, it's what led people like Nicola Sturgeon to try to send a male rapist to a female prison and think they could, because they could claim that there was ambiguity over this issue. And that's what many of the women's rights activists groups
what they
would
did
say
was they tried to strip away, when you get a gender recognition certificate, what Nicola Sturgeon tried to do is say that anyone can just come along and say that I now identify and I get one. Yeah. In previous cases, people may not know, but to get a gender recognition certificate, they had to jump through hoops. Their GP had to sign off on it. Sometimes they had to live in a certain way for several years. And that was maybe a more sensible way. But people didn't know, because all of this happened and none of us paid any attention to it until this became part of a culture war. I think that allowing anyone just to wake up one morning and decide to recognise themselves as whatever they wanted was clearly not going to stand up to any kind of judicial challenge. But we also do need to remember that there are people who are misreading this law and now think that they can treat people, they think that this means that all the rights have been stripped from a certain section of society, and then they can now treat them any way they want, and that's not the case.
I mean, the ruling is one of the main reasons was to bring about clarity. Do you both think that is the case? You know, when we read that the health minister couldn't say which changing room a transgender woman should use as of now.
So Kishore Faulkner, who's been in charge of a lot of, Baroness Faulkner has been in charge of a lot of this, says that the right that transgender people will have is to use a third space, a space of their own. And so much of the commentary today has been, well, it may not have been what you were aiming for, but in order to be able to accommodate everybody, it's very likely you wind up with unisex facilities, you wind up with individual unisex toilets much more frequently. Now, if that's the outcome, at least there will be some sort of clarity. But you would hope and expect, this was not an unforeseen possibility, this decision. The government should have seen this coming and known that they were going to be asked about it. And if the Chancellor is booked for the media round, you better believe you should be ready to answer that question.
Alison, let's move on to The Guardian, and they're looking at the NHS working to overhaul guidelines for single-sex spaces in thousands of hospitals and wherever else, GP surgeries, etc.
I mean, in terms of hospitals, I don't think that there ever should have been any mixing of patients in hospitals anyway, because people in hospitals, especially the elderly, My father has dementia, he's in hospital at the minute, and the wards are very definitely separated out into male and female, but there has been times when he has been in mixed wards, and that has been very distressing, I think, for some of the people on those wards and the people who are actually tending to those patients. I do think that it would be good in an ideal world if there was enough money that all of these things could be kept separate. The fact is, if you go into A&E now, you'll be lying on a trolley and you'll not get to say who you're lying on a trolley beside.
Yeah.
And that's just because our health service is on its knees, and that's going to continue on. So in a lovely ideal world where everyone had their own room and all hospitals were separated, but to put these restrictions on hospitals at the times when they just don't have the space or to separate people out in this way.
I think, well, first of all, I'm very sorry about your father. Secondly, I think it's something very specific that is being addressed here in this story in The Guardian, which is that under current NHS guidance, for England at least, transgender people should be accommodated, the hospitals are currently told, based on how they define themselves, what they say their pronouns are and how they dress. And the new understanding of a woman being defined by biological sex, this is what how the court says you should be interpreting the Equality Act, that would go. So that would provide clarity. It would say you're treated as your biological sex, not by the name you choose, the pronoun you have, you've assigned, you claim for yourself, and how you dress yourself.
I've always found a lot of this could have been much easier resolved if the law had have treated people as they were the sex whenever they committed the crime. The reason that we've had these, as I say, hard cases make bad law, you know, where we've seen these very predatory men who've committed atrocious sex crimes and all of a sudden decided halfway through the case after they've been tried or charged that they're now a woman. Well, no, you're not. You're the sex that you were when you committed that crime. And that would have put an end to this nonsense a long time ago.
But of course, people in hospitals aren't criminals, they're patients. And the point is that you shouldn't... this decision is being implemented within the NHS will stop the hospital saying we're going to treat this person who is not a criminal but a patient according to their pronoun and how they dress. They'll instead treat them by their biological sex, which would mean not having a trans man.
Just to get another story in, because we've spent quite a long time on just this one story. The Guardian, Labour MPs may be allowed to abstain on disability benefit.
Well, it's another sign of the government being in some trouble. I don't think many Labour MPs will say, I went into politics to cut people's disability allowance. Yeah. And there's an instinctive sort of, especially with a party of the left, there is an instinctive discomfort with the conclusions that the government has reached. The Guardian speculates that the government will allow people who disagree with this agenda to abstain. This is very early in a government to start this kind of drift of your agenda. You'll recall that when they pushed through the cut on winter fuel allowance, they made no such concessions to people who were worried about it. And it's a really swift decline in their ability to control issues, especially as issues come up on their left, their own party. You never would have thought a government with a majority this big would be facing headlines. That's 3 headlines in a row, right? Whether it's about what's happening with their backbenches on this trans rights agenda, and now this point about disability cuts. It's bad news for the government.
Very different to the winter fuel allowance that went through, as you say. Alex and Alison, we must leave it there for the moment. We're going to take a break. Coming up, Alison's been kind enough to fly in from Belfast to be with us tonight, but will she regret it tomorrow as the Easter getaway kicks in? We'll be right back.
Sorry, I talked you out.
Paris reverberated to the sights, sounds and smells of conflict. There's a focal point to all this anger, and that is Emmanuel Macron. I'm Adam Parsons, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Brussels. There are dozens of people desperately clambering to get onto that boat. It is a chaotic scene, but it's being watched by dozens of French police officers on the beach. I've reported on migration across Europe, close up on the ground, understanding that sense of desperation and meeting the criminal gangs behind it. This old fishing boat set off from the Libyan port of Tobruk. There were 606 people who were on board. So we've been distributing life jackets to all the people on board this boat, and now the first person is coming on board. This is the ugly side of Italian football.
In Italy, everything is really organised.
Football's problems with hooliganism, racism were just dormant, and now they're back and they're getting worse. We cover so many countries, languages and cultures and work hard to gain trust to bring you the full story first. Help is slowly reaching these places. It's not just homes, but whole streets like this one that have been reduced to rubble and dust. This is a picture of destruction. Everywhere you look in this mountaintop community, there is absolute devastation. These are the settlers in waiting, keen to start a new life, to annex Gaza for Israel.
The least we can do is just kick them out of our land.
Gaza, which is just 2 miles in that direction, is under attack again. Getting the chance to tell people's stories, it's a privilege.
The Premier League Running is live on NBC and streaming on Peacock, with a crucial fixture in the race for Europe. Saturday, the unrelenting drama heats up as both Aston Villa and Newcastle chase Champions League qualification.
An opportunity neither want to squander.
This is the Premier League Running, live on NBC and Peacock.
A show of military might and menace. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Have a quick word for Sky News. Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine? American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display. I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, Alex Deane and Allison Morris. Let's take a look at the Mirror front page and the very moving story of Louise Shackleton, who travelled with her husband to Dignitas in terms of assisted dying and aided his suicide and then handed herself into police.
Do you know, I think that my views on this have changed so dramatically over the years, because originally I would have thought, you know, no, that could be too open to exploitation, and people, especially if there's money or wills and wealth involved, could use it to try and get rid of people who are just a burden, who they just didn't want to care for or look after. And now, I suppose, as I've got older myself, but also, as I said, not to make it all about me, my father has dementia, and I know that he would not want to live the way he's living now. He no longer have the capacity to make a decision like this, so that's out of, but I know the man that he was wouldn't want to see the man that he is now. And the most common thing that myself and my siblings say to each other when we speak to my father is, don't ever let me get like that. And I mean, what is the answer to that? You know, how do you allow someone to die with dignity? And I've been reading this, and you can see the love jumping off the page. This wasn't a decision that was made for the benefits of Anthony Shackleton's wife. It was made for the benefits of him. It was something that he did while he was still in a fit state to make it. He had motor neuron disease, which is an awful illness and just strips everything from a person. Do I think that it should be legislated for? I think that we need to have a proper, honest conversation about it. We wouldn't allow our animals to suffer in the way that we allow people to suffer, and I think that as a society, maybe we do need to discuss it more fully. I know that there needs to be checks and balances in place to stop exploitation of it and people taking advantage of it. But I do think that if you're in your right state of mind and you know that you have an illness that cannot be cured and that you're only going to get worse as time goes on, you should be allowed to make that decision for yourself.
Alex, have your views on this changed? Because over the years, the recent months, we've heard quite a few people say that they've actually now changed their opinion.
I don't think so, but we were discussing before the break about how hard cases can make bad law in a different context. And there's a debate to be had about how helpful it is to look at cases which draw at the heartstrings and are emotive. And it's clearly an emotive story that we are discussing. But there's an important note of caution here to those who support the bill that's making its way through Parliament. This case, I don't think, would conform under the Terminally Ill Adults End of Life Bill, because you have to have 6 months or less to live, according to your doctors, and this man would not. So one of the things that objectors to the bill point to is the prospect for a slippery slope, which, with all due respect, we're already having now, because we're discussing how people who have more than 6 months to live might benefit from the provisions of this sort of thing. The other thing that is concerning about coverage of something that's undeniably emotive and moving, like this story, is that it doesn't give the context of the debate currently being had in Parliament in the way that the debate is being had. So Kim Leadbeater, who's leading the bill, talked for ages about the central role of a judge in the process, and that would give us, in her words, the strongest system in the world. That was the pledge. Then when the judiciary said it wouldn't work and it would take up all of the time in that division of the civil justice system, and they changed the agenda, they sort of pretended that there'd been no change. Well, that was the thing they offered all of the reassurance around. So no matter how concerning the individual cases that we can read are and how much we can identify and understand the emotion concerned, the way this bill's been going through Parliament is not an acceptable one, I think, and then no number of upsetting cases will change that.
Gear change. We're going to move to the Express and talk about the Easter getaway. Alison, we said that you'd come down to join us here in London, Belfast, but it's not looking good.
I am hopeful that not many people have woke up and decided that they want to go on their Easter holidays to Belfast, and maybe I'd be okay, because I'm going the opposite direction that everybody else is coming in. But yeah, the airports are really busy today when I was coming through them already. I mean, you can see that the Easter holidays, there's a lot of children in the airports, which you don't usually get during the week, where families were making their way off on their Easter holidays. I expect it to be slight chaos, but I am going to do what I usually do when I'm stuck in an airport. I'm going to check into the lounge. That is the best thing.
Just suck up the cost.
In a difficult airport situation, I advise all of you, check into the lounge.
It does seem that people are not expecting people to be travelling this weekend.
No. Well, they've closed them by surprise every year.
Rail engineering
They've closed Euston Station. I mean, people go to see their families both ways, come to London and go from London to home. Extraordinary. But I hope you make the flight.
Yes, I hope so too.
Hope you all have safe travels over this Easter break. Alex and Alison, thank you very much for the moment. See you at the top of the 11. Let's take a look at the weather for you now.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, apart from the travel, the weather will be unsettled through the Easter weekend, especially in the west, but it won't be a complete washout. Good Friday will start wet and windy for Ireland, Northern Ireland and south-west Britain. Elsewhere, it'll be largely dry with a rural frost possible in the north and a few fog patches in the south. Much of Scotland and northern, central and eastern England will stay dry through the morning with pleasant sunny spells. Just the odd shower is possible there. Elsewhere, it'll be cool and cloudy with outbreaks of rain, heavy in places. The wind will pick up strongest in the west. Cloud and patchy rain will become more extensive through the afternoon.
A bright start and always a warm welcome. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
Coming up next on Sky News at 11, after an earlier invitation from the King, Donald Trump says that a September date is being set for his visit to the UK.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers. We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
The most significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Don't say we call